Welcome to Writing Westward. I'm your host, Brendan Rensink. Mainstream American society's understandings of who Native peoples are tend to be monolithic, overgeneralized, and often based in stereotypes perpetuated by old Western films, novels, and the like. In recent years, many Natives have been using their voices in art, film, literature, and public discourse to correct misconceptions and assert their presence as diverse, real peoples, refusing to sit passively as others ignore, misrepresent, or culturally appropriate their identities. Writer Tiffany Midge adds to the chorus of these voices with her poetry, essays, and humor. Today we talk with her about her new collection, Bury My Heart at Chuck E. Cheese's. Thanks for listening. For new listeners, let me take a quick moment to explain a bit about the podcast. Each episode features a conversation with authors, journalists, novelists, poets, scientists, academics, or others who write about the North American West. Our goal is to not only showcase their work, but to spark curiosity among you, the listeners, to think more deeply about the region, its lands and environments, and the histories and experiences of the people who call it home. If a writer intrigues you, you can find links to their work in the show notes or at writingwestward.org. And if you have a moment, please do subscribe, share links with friends, leave us a review or rating on Apple Podcasts or whatever platform you're using to listen. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and send in some feedback. Writing Westward is supported by the Charles Redd Center for Western Studies at Brigham Young University, where I, Brendan Rensink, serve as Associate Director and an Associate Professor of History. For better or worse, this is a one-man operation, with me playing the roles of host, producer, sound engineer, and just about everything else, all of which entail tasks for which I have very little training. But I am passionate about the North American West, and all the work is well worth the excuse to read more and to talk to interesting people. At the end of this episode, I will include some more information on me and my scholarship, and on the Redd Center, our programming and projects, and funding opportunities that you could apply for. That's right, we may want to give you money. With all this business out of the way, let's move on to today's conversation. First, I'd like to introduce to you who it is we're talking to and why. Tiffany Midge is a citizen of the Standing Rock Sioux tribe and was raised in the Pacific Northwest. She's a former columnist for Indian Country Today and has written for a number of publications such as McSweeney's, LitHub, and World Literature Today. She also taught writing and composition at Northwest Indian College. She's the author of the award-winning books The Woman Who Married a Bear, Poems, and Outlaws, Renegades, and Saints, Diary of a Mixed-Up Half-Breed, among others. I wanted to speak with her for the podcast for her voice both as an Indigenous woman and for the humor that permeates her writing. Her self-description as a merciless Indian fabulous, a mixed-up half-breed, aspiring to be the first distinguished writer in residence at Seattle Space Needle, or voted most likely to be impaled by narwhals, offers a glimpse of her wit and personality. I think you'll enjoy both my conversation with her and her writings, which you should definitely check out. Tiffany Midge, welcome to Writing Westward.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
In my introduction for the episode today, I spoke a little bit about comedic traditions of, punching up, challenging authority, picking apart or lampooning mainstream society and the things that they insist we accept as universal truths, And as I work through your collection, I see all of that, a lot of that. As this is a Western podcast, I wanted to circle back kind of often to kind of Western stereotypes and mythologies about Native peoples and how they're portrayed. And so my two-part question is, I was curious, what were the Western stereotypes about Native peoples that you encountered growing up in popular media or film or art? And, just as Western historians have been picking those mythologies apart, I'm curious which of those you feel most drawn to deconstruct or lampoon or poke at.
Sure. I talk about, Bonanza episodes. I talk about the Searchers. John, who's that guy? John
Ford, the director, or John Wayne, the actor?
Yeah, I haven't had enough coffee this morning. But yeah, I sometimes talk about Bonanza and, I'll look at some of those episodes. And recently I saw an episode where there was a guy and he was like kicking this old Indian woman in the butt. around the campfire, and they had kidnapped these Indians. And it was striking to me because, that's what in that John Ford movie, The Searchers, that's what John Wayne was doing. That was just so incredibly shocking and egregious, to see, was kicking this old Indian woman in the butt, like, and down a hill or something like that. Um, and I just thought, wow, so that's like imitating something from The Searchers, obviously, right? Or maybe because butt kicking was just something that people just did back then. I don't know, but it just felt like it was just a total, mimicking of that, of that sort of thing. And I was just shocked by that, but also like vaguely bemused. It's sort of a two-headed, because on the one hand, I'm sort of fascinated by all of these kinds of things. And then on the other hand, it's just really, really sort of infuriating as well, because it had so much influence on how the overculture perceives, Indians. And it's very dangerous. And it just had a major impact, for generations. To see this kind of stuff, because when my parents were watching Bonanza, or people of my parents' generation, they didn't have the toolkit to, like, break that apart, and say, oh my God, that's just horrifying that this woman's getting kicked around like that. But they would look at it and they wouldn't care. They could care less, really, right? But I'm rambling at this point.
Are there some of these like these tropes and stereotypes that, like, that you see in Bonanza episodes? Are there some that you are particularly kind of riled up by versus other ones that you kind of give a pass to? Like you say, you're somewhat bemused by this, or
I don't know. I shouldn't even say that I'm bemused by it, because it's sort of like, collecting, paraphernalia from, pre in 20th century, pre mid-century, collectibles. It's that kind of thing, like if you were to collect like a board game, from like a Custer Last Stand board game, or some people collect, figurines from like Africana. And I have an actual poem about that I wrote about, these sort of things. And, and they're racist items, but I mean, at the same time, there's just that, I don't know, I'm just sort of fascinated by it as well. But I oughtn't be. I should be out destroying these things and throwing them into fires. But I have that, that, like I said, I'm bemused by it. But
there's power also in holding these things up and making people look at them and think about them.
I
be it
suppose.
through comedy or whatever else.
Sure. It's like a sense of what am I trying to think? Like they're just absurd. And so I think that's where I laugh at them, because I just find them so absurd. But also, everything's a two-edged sword. I think it's okay to feel a lot of different things about one thing, feel two opposing things about one thing.
Well, that's how most of life is. It's never quite so clear cut. As you were growing up as a kid, how did these types of things hit you in popular media? Or like, did you grow up watching Western movies?
Not a ton.
Okay.
No, I mean, I was like into what everybody else was watching, the Brady Bunch and stuff like that.
No, well, I mean, this actually kind of leads perfectly to another line of questions I have, which is about, I think many Americans would be surprised to discover that most Native Americans do not live on reservations. Most grow up in urban, suburban settings. You're a citizen of the Standing Rock Sioux Nation. Your mother was Lakota, but you grew up in kind of suburban Pacific Northwest, right?
I did.
And so, I mean, you already said like you were kind of into the Brady Bunch. You were into what all the other kids were into. So, like, were you one of the only Native kids in your school or in your peer group?
We had a few. We probably had a few Native kids, and I went to an after school and group. It was like an organization through the public schools, and so we would get together periodically and do like cultural things. And that was a really interesting thing to grow up with. So I had that sort of exposure. and role models through that as well.
So much of what you're writing in this collection and from some of your other things that I've looked through, it's all deeply personal. You're writing about yourself, and so I'm just trying to situate, your kind of upbringing and where you're coming from as you're looking at your own life and also looking at region, looking at politics and issues of ethnicity and things. One of these through lines, kind of, it seems like through a lot of your writing is uh, of your ethnicity and your mixed heritage, right? You subtitled, I think was it your first book or one of your first books? The subtitle was "The Diary of a Mixed Up Half Breed."
Hmm.
So this is kind of a prominent part of how you think about and write about yourself, right?
A long time ago, yeah. But yeah, I mean, you could say that for sure.
In this collection, you write, you say, "I'm an undeterminable ethnicity, tending to blend in more or less in any particular group." Again, trying to figure out where you're coming from. Do you think that at least how others perceive you, this ethnic ambiguity, has that allowed you to be more of an insider in various groups, or has it kind of made you an outsider? Or maybe it cuts both ways depending on who you're with.
Yeah, I used to have a joke that said that whenever I was around white people, people would say that I looked differently, and then when I was around Indians, they would say the opposite, that I looked white. That's just sort of a joke, though.
So whoever you're with, they think you look not like them.
Yeah, something like that. It just stands out more. It's just sort of a dumb joke, but yeah. I was always an outsider, and just within any group that I was in, but I don't feel like it was so much because of my, background or my ethnicity or who my family was. I think it had more to do with just my personality, which just tended to be I'm very shy and not particularly forthcoming, and I like to sort of blend in the backgrounds, but at the same time, I also have this like sort of necessity for attention. So I don't know. I mean, everybody's, a multitude of different things, but I tended to just sort of like, I wasn't particularly like a popular girl or anything like that.
I've heard lots of in like on comedy podcasts and stuff. That this is actually a familiar story of kids who kind of always felt like an outsider, somewhat shy, but yet somehow drawn to wanting to be the center of attention and this tension, of wanting to not be seen, but also needing to be seen.
Right. Yeah. And it probably led to, my father was a theater guy. And so it sort of led to, my joining the theater. And that was one way to sort of express, that need to perform or that need to be seen or, what have you. But mostly it was just, I had a lot of different outlets for my creativity. And I was very expressive in that way and very just sort of artistic, I guess. Um, and that's kind of where my mind was just sort of in the, sort of dreamy and spacey land,
Hmm.
not really in step with all of my peers, right? Um, I wasn't like an outcast, but I always felt like an outcast a little bit.
What led you towards writing as a big outlet then for your creativity?
It was just one place that I could go that was really convenient. Like I said, for years I did, theater, and that was always incredibly fun because it was so social. And I was with misfits, like myself, of course. I mean, other artists are just drawn to other artists, because we always feel like we're misfits and out of step with what everybody else is telling us we're supposed to be doing with our lives. So I think that writing was just sort of a natural progression, a natural way into that. And just the more that I did it, I just seem to have gotten better at it through the years. Just one little click at a time.
One
Yeah.
page at a time. Yeah. Well, maybe we should turn to some of what you write in this book. You open with a series of memories and scenes surrounding your mother's funeral, and I thought it was a striking opening. It kind of sets a tone for the volume that humor and sarcasm is really perhaps a core part of who you are, even when grappling with the most tragic of circumstances. I'm curious, why did you start with with these series of vignettes?
I'm not sure. I think that a lot of it just had to do with being the title piece of the book, and I just thought I'll just stick it up front. So a lot of it was just sort of a stylistic thing, and I didn't really give it a whole lot of thought. I do know that for me personally, it's a strong piece. And so I just wanted to sort of illuminate that. But as I go on too, there's other sort of pieces that allude to family loss, like the loss of my father. And I write about these things a lot. And sometimes I mean, they're natural things to write about, but they're also kind of dark, like, oh, she's writing about the death of this and the death of that. And it's life-changing and incredibly, dramatic and pivotal in one's life. But at the same time, I worry that I'm just writing about dead Indians.
Oh man.
Yeah, like, oh, there she is writing about dead Indians, and I try to avoid that, right? But I suppose it's unavoidable if these are really important things in one's life. And that's just all symbolic anyway, because I'm not writing about dead Indians. I'm writing about my own family, and not, I'm not borrowing off of some, tragedy trope or anything like that. But
Yeah, or like,
mm,
like tragedy porn, right? Just
yeah,
digging into the most horrific thing there is just for the spectacle of it. But
sure.
that's, I
Yeah.
mean, this speaks to, again, I think how a lot of mainstream America thinks that natives should be or should not be. That, like, why wouldn't someone write about the passing of their parents? Why wouldn't a human being like write about the multidimensional aspects of their life? Where
Yeah.
natives, I think, have often been kind of forced to, or at least they've been portrayed as like, just so one dimensional, right? Like the stoic Indian or the mindless barbarian savage, right? Just these
Mhm.
caricatures. And then we act surprised when when native peoples or anyone like reveals themselves as humans just like us, complex and mixed up. And
Mm, sure. And
do you have oh, go ahead.
no, no, no. I was just going to say that, representation and it's very self-conscious to be like a particular, sort of kind of writer, categorized as a certain kind of sort of writer, because it's just there's so much self-consciousness involved with that at times, and it's hard to release that. For me, like I always have to sort of second guess everything. And I think it takes a really long time for a younger native writer to sort of establish, their voice and their point of view, because there's so much of that, self-consciousness and like fear of representation sort of holding them back. And I know that it took me absolute years and years and years to sort of be able to break out of that and figure out, what was an authentic voice for me. And I just don't think that white writers are burdened with that. They're not worried about their representation of their, of their ethnicity, their race, their background. And isn't that funny though? That's just like so unfair and horrible at the same time, right?
Yep.
Um,
I try to be upfront about who I'm not. I've written on Indigenous topics. So I always want to be upfront, like I'm not claiming any kind of Indigenous heritage, right? But beyond that, there's no pressure on me to try to really define, yeah, who I am in those kinds of ways. But I have a number of Native friends, from conferences and other historians, and one of the topics of conversation that we regularly fall into is this: the kind of the politics of identity, indigeneity, authenticity that they all have to wrestle with,
mm,
and I don't. And it's fraught. It's really complicated.
mm. Yeah,
Um,
it is. It is. I
and you
mean,
say it took you years to kind of build a confidence in your voice.
yeah, to feel like I had something, like a particular voice or something that's like uniquely you, that still that you still feel that sort of passes in a way. I don't know. Just this, I think it's just the self-consciousness. And I think it's true of any writer starting out, of course, too. It's trying to establish the something authentic and a voice within themselves that isn't just like a carbon copy of someone else that they really like. And it's hard. I think it's really hard for a lot of writers to get there.
Yeah.
And and I'm not a young writer, and I'm still struggling with a lot of that kind of stuff. And I always have to like reread and reread and reread and figure, um, and be having a unique voice is, I think, can be very difficult.
But I think that you have to deal with a whole bunch of other added pressure of
Sure.
of trying to measure up to some imposed form of authenticity or
Yeah.
not, or
And representation is
yeah,
really important too,
yeah.
because people are, I'm reading, and I hope other people are reading, but I'm reading for those kinds of signifiers as well. There's some writing that I just kind of go, huh, this is a novel about a native growing up in their reservation, but they don't know what prairie turnips are, like, and I'm like, oh, okay, so okay, I get, all right, I see, or I'm reading a piece about someone who's a native person at a powwow, and they describe it as something sacred, like going to church, a religious ceremony, and I'm like, really?
That hasn't been your powwow experience.
I
Yeah.
don't think I just and I'm just, yeah, I'm like, my mind is just always like notices those kinds of things, and it just seems kind of strange and odd to me. But I think a lot of native people are still discovering their indigeneity, or what being native is, or all of that. But when I see it, it just kind of goes, dang, that's just
Do you think humor kind of allows you to cut through some of that and disarm some of that pressure? Not sidestep it or avoid, accountability or anything like that, but does it help you kind of cut through?
Well, teasing is pretty paramount to like any sort of culture, but particularly native culture is teasing, and Vine Deloria talks about that a lot in his essay Indian Humor, um, and that's just one aspect of it.
Yeah, self-deprecation, right?
Self-deprecation and just teasing other people as a form of correction, without without like bringing too much shame upon them. And I think it's great. I think it's really terrific to know how to tease your friends, um, and just, yeah, bring people down a peg so that they don't get too big-headed.
But of course, in so doing, at least in your writing, you're also bringing yourself down at just as many pegs, right? I mean, it's you're very tongue in cheek and cynical and sarcastic as you know lob these bombs at other people around you, but also at yourself, and
Yeah,
that's why it comes off, I think, as authentic and not mean spirited, right? Because it's the teasing, but measured with self-deprecation and humility.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
I think like I have one
Self-deprecation.
friend who, um, him and his brother had this running gag for a while where they would call each other and leave each other voicemails quoting Star Wars lines, but in the voice of their native uncle who had a kind of really thick, kind of stereotypical, uh, like native cadence of talking, and so they would leave each other voicemails, as Darth Vader or whatever, but as channeled through their native uncle, and
Oh, yeah.
they thought it was the funniest thing, right? And it
Yeah.
was very funny. But then I had to pause because I felt uncomfortable. Can I laugh at this? Um, because I'm from an outside group, right? So it's not me. Then they are laughing at themselves and teasing each other through it, right? But even I remember he said once, he's like, I hope these this audio better never get leaked, or I'm going to be in big trouble. Because he even had
Oh, really?
some self consciousness, like, oh, has this gone too far? Um, so how do you find that balance of wanting to lampoon things and tease and make light of sometimes very serious things, but without, I don't even know what the line would be
I don't know, it's
called.
just, yeah, I mean, and there's always a line. I mean, last night I tweeted about, every time, like, I was looking for butter at the store the other day, and, there's all the Land O'Lakes butters that are just empty, right? And every time I see that, I'm just like, oh my God, where did Mia go? And and that brings you to like murdered and missing Indigenous women. And so, and it's hard you can't joke about that. I mean, it's horrible, and it happens in communities, and it's really hurtful for people. And yeah, and so that's kind of sort of like a very inappropriate and edgy joke. And but at the same time, I still feel like I have to like make light of things, can't I?
Yeah.
um and yeah, and that's not funny, but sometimes I don't know, sometimes just being inappropriate in and of itself is funny. Um
But I think it's also what I, my Native friends are quite consistently the most sarcastic people I know. I think
Yeah.
it's I think it's an important coping mechanism for communities, right? Being able to laugh and being able to be irreverent,
Mm.
that's survival in the past and today, you know. But
Yeah.
especially I think for groups outside of the mainstream who are facing different kinds of oppression, you know.
Well, morbid humor has been around for a real long time. And that's just a part of it, sort of the Black humor. And in Indian country, that stuff can get pretty daggum rugged. But I think that it can get rugged in any community that has a sense of humor. It's just the nature of being human.
Yeah.
Is just like laughing and in the sight of darkness. It's just one of those things. I mean, I remember just sitting on my grandfather's porch with my sisters, and we were laughing during his funeral, and not during the funeral, but I mean, but like during the reception with all these people in the house, and it's just a release of tension, really. But it was horrible that we were just like finding so much funniness in it, and my mother was making jokes about his last breaths, and everybody's just like straining to like look over the person in front of them to like see his last, and it was just so freaking funny that we were laughing at that stuff. And now this sounds horrible, so I should just shut up. It
But
sounds awful.
that's being human, right? And why would it be any other way? Like I think about some students a couple years ago we watched a clip from Little Big Man with Chief Dan George. Uh,
Yeah.
and he's hilarious.
Mm.
He's so funny in that film. And so I talked to the students saying like, you know, people talk about this performance as like this real important moment in Native portrayal in cinema, but we wouldn't be commenting on this at all if he was just a white character being funny in the ways he is. We were talking about it because um, you know, Natives have been denied the ability to laugh in films and to be funny and to be just human, right? And
Mm.
uh, you know, when my grandfather died, we definitely weren't laughing at the funeral, but you know, but those few days after the funeral, like being with my cousins, we were gathering for a very sad moment, but we had so much fun together. We were laughing and goofing around, and I think that's how humans react to tragedy often. And
Mm.
you know, why wouldn't Native people do that as well? I don't know, but I think people expect like the stoic Indian, right, that
Mhm.
is going to take death very seriously and not
Mhm.
do what everyone else does. Um,
Yeah.
you mentioned Twitter, and you have a really great chapter. I don't know. Do we call these chapters? I don't know what they're
What
called.
what
Pieces?
tweets? Oh,
No,
you mean
no. In the book,
my essays?
yeah,
Yeah,
essays.
the
You have one
pieces.
called Tweets as assigned texts for a Native American Studies course. I thought
Yeah.
I thought some of these were really great, and I wanted to share a couple, and then I wanted to get maybe your commentary on a couple. I like this one on environment and land. White people, the original man spreaders, man spreading the North American continent since 1492. That's pretty great. Um,
And you
settlers.
you got
Set,
you got that? I had people that didn't get that. They didn't know what
no, I
man
mean if you've ridden the
was.
subway or public transportation, you know about man spreaders, right?
If you're on social media, you know what it is.
Yeah, mansplainers as well, right?
Right?
Settlers put the colon in colonialism. I thought that was pretty good. Um,
Yeah.
let me have. Oh, what was this other one that? Maybe you can read this one, and then and I'd like to know if you've ever actually said this to anyone, on racism and social justice, your Game of Thrones reference here. Do you want to read that?
Hmm. Resolved to say, nothing, Jon Snow, whenever someone with white privilege condescends to me. Yeah.
Have you ever pulled that out?
Have I ever said that?
Uh-huh.
Uh-uh.
No.
Nobody in my mind.
Yeah, I'd be curious to see how that would go over. So you're a funny person. You're known as a writer who, you do poetry and you do a lot of writing, but humor is kind of not to go back to butter, but your bread and butter. You also have a great joke about white bread in here, which had me laughing the other day. I don't know if we'll get to that, but bread and butter to come full circle. But you do you use humor uh, in your everyday life as so like a lot of what you're doing here, right? And like this essay or some of these others is you're really skewering kind of mainstream white culture in various ways. Do you do that in your everyday life as well?
Only if it comes up.
Or do you keep these things just to yourself in your head?
Well, I mean, going to the butter aisle. I mean, it just stuff like that comes up, and in everyday society, in everyday situations, that stuff comes up. Is always a reminder of certain aspects. Because you're living within a certain kind of culture, and then you have another. I don't like to say walking in two worlds, but I mean that's sort of essentially it's sort of like walking in two different consciousnesses, rather than two worlds
Hmm.
in a way. But it's on the other side of the coin too, right? If I go to the reservation and I see outside of the, one of the main one of the main areas at the reservation, like everybody has these giant SUV trucks. And I'm like, I'm always like a little, and I know I live in the West and everything, but it's just, and everybody has giant SUV trucks. But I always thought it was kind of funny because we're supposed to be the premier environmentalists. Yeah, like my sister drives, like a Dodge Dakota, this like big old giant truck called a Dakota. And it's like,
Oh,
ah,
I didn't even get that. I thought I was just
right.
thinking about it as a large truck, but the name.
I
Oh
mean, that's
boy.
one aspect of it. But having Indians driving these giant gas hogs is always just sort of like, wow, that's okay. But my car is only a medium gas hog, but I hardly even drive anywhere. So, and
Yeah,
my
at least not for this last year, right?
Well, no, but I don't live in the city anymore. So it's not like I just, drive from here to, I don't drive anywhere because we live out west, everything's wide open. We don't have massive urban sprawl. In where I live, and I suppose you live in Nebraska somewhere, or don't you?
I'm in Utah. I went to grad school in Nebraska though.
Oh, okay. So I don't know what your city environment's like, but
I'm in the middle of suburbia, on the Wasatch Front.
I don't miss the driving aspect of having to go from place to place to place in traffic.
Yeah.
And that I spent so much of my life doing.
Like how
Uh,
much of your life have you spent sitting at red lights?
yeah.
Just
I mean, just driving here to across town, it's like four, maybe three or four red lights, and that feels like, like an eternity.
yeah. Yeah,
Oh no, I
you're
have to go to the outside of town. And it takes, like all of 5 minutes,
yeah.
right?
My wife grew up in Phoenix, which is, just
Oh,
suburban sprawl
yeah, I was
and
just there recently. Oh my God.
so her sense of scale of like, oh yeah, let's go to this one store or restaurant. And so you jump on an interstate and you transfer to another one and you end
Oh.
up driving so far, right? But
Ah.
then for a couple years when we lived in Nebraska, we lived in a very small town in Nebraska. And we laugh now at how quickly our sense of scale changed because yeah, we would complain about like, oh, I don't want to go all the way to the public library. It was like a 3-minute drive, you know. But then we go down to visit family in Phoenix and we're willing to drive 30 minutes to go, to a Nordstrom or something.
Well, I don't. I like to go to Nordstrom's, and I don't get to do that very often. Even before the before times, I don't get to do that very often. So it's always a real treat to do that, and I always feel like such a country hick when I like go to a giant shopping box mall or something. Like, oh my gosh, look at all the things. Um,
Well,
but,
like, another thing something we have in common, like I'm from Bellingham, Washington, and you lived there for a couple of years.
Oh,
And,
okay.
whenever we go up there, my wife, she's always like, oh, these are my people, because people just walk around looking normal, she says. Like they have jeans or
What does
maybe
that
even some
mean?
sweatpants. They just like look very normal. But down in Phoenix or here, when you go to the mall, like everyone's just like totally dressed up, all fancy. And she's
Is
like,
that
no,
right?
this isn't my vibe. She's like, I prefer that Pacific Northwest vibe.
Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, the fleece jackets and the jeans and the big old booty things. Like everybody's gonna go climb a mountain later.
Oh yeah, everyone's decked out in
Yeah,
all of their outdoor
probably
gear.
are gonna go climb a mountain later.
Maybe some are, yeah. Um, I wanted to pivot a little bit. I want to see if I can get this to work. I want to share a video clip, which
I love
podcast
it.
listeners, you'll just hear the audio of this, but you could go on YouTube and
Oh,
look this up yourself. But I think
okay.
we'll be able to get the audio to work here. This is from a CBC, a Canadian sketch comedy group, Tall Boys. Are you familiar with them, Tiffany?
No, huh?
So it's these four Canadian comedians. One is Black, one is, I think, from an Ethiopian immigrant community, one's Asian American, and one is First Nations. His name's Vance Benzo. He's Ojibwe. And they just they lampoon all kinds of everything Canadian, but also a lot of kind of the racial politics in Canada. And I wanted to get your take on this. And this is like maybe a minute and a half clip, but it's a fake game show. So I'll set this up for people who are just listening. It's a fake game show where this Indigenous game show host, played by Vance, is out on the street interviewing people on a show called on a show about like how well do you know Canada? And the specific game they're playing this day is Indigenous Canadian or Canadian Penny. And he's going to ask this white guy a bunch of questions, and the white guy has to determine if he's talking about an Indigenous Canadian or a Canadian penny. And I wanted to get your take on this the joke that they're making, well, there's a lot of jokes, is how uncomfortable this white guy on the street is. Because he doesn't know what to do. He doesn't know what to say because he doesn't want to say the wrong thing. And I get a lot of that vibe from your book. I feel like if I was to hand your book to a lot of my friends and family, they would feel deeply uncomfortable about what do I do with this humor? Or
Oh,
you know what I mean? Okay, so anyways, let me click play on this and we'll get your take.
Well, today we are going to be playing Indigenous Canadian or Canadian Penny. Okay. You get 4 clues, and you're going to guess whether I'm talking about Indigenous Canadian or Canadian Penny. Pretty simple. All right, clue number 1. They are known to be reddish-brown in color.
I'm not sure if I want to.
Clue number 2. This is something they might say. The Canadian government has been trying to get rid of me for years.
Oh geez. That could be both.
All right, get ready for that 3rd clue. Upon birth, they are marked with the Queen's image.
Okay. Okay, I think I got this one.
Last clue. Is this something an Indigenous Canadian would say, or something a Canadian penny would say? I am a penny.
Penny, it's Penny.
In the hands of settlers and invaders. Oh, I am sorry, Connor. I was using poetic license.
Damn it.
Team Miigwech for playing, Connor. What a pleasure it has been.
Wait, Indigenous people are not marked at birth.
Guess I lied to you. Do we know anyone else who's been lied to? Doesn't feel too good, does it, Connor? All right, join us next time where we will be playing What Should You Call Me? Indigenous, First Nations, Vance? The answer will surprise you.
Okay.
that guy is so adorable.
So
A
what?
little white hair or whatever.
Yeah, he's so profoundly uncomfortable and wants to say the right thing, and uh, yeah.
Yeah, it's really funny
What's your
though.
relationship with this, with the discomfort of non-native peoples with native politics or humor or whatever it is?
Well, I mean, it's natural. They don't know what to look at. They don't know what's funny. They don't get the joke. So that's pretty normal. But it can be a hindrance. The guy that organizes Litquake in San Francisco, that big book fair, he brought my book to, his board members, and they were, like, whoa, like what? Bury my that's ugh. Like it's just sort of very whatever that word is for this, it's very profane, right? It sounds very profane, particularly if it's like written, they didn't know it was written by a Lakota person. And that gives me a certain, certain permission to be able to use it, I guess. Or just to make that into something profane, I guess. But yeah, so they were uncomfortable with it initially, but I think that he must have convinced them otherwise. So in that regard, but it's funny. I've gotten a lot of white folks that love it. A lot of white folks are on board with it, and I think it's because there's just so much inside stuff in that, and there's and they feel sort of like, oh, this is like an insider's view of a certain kind of culture, um, and it helps them sort of be acquainted with that a little bit and get to know that, because as Vine said, the best way to know a, culture is to know what makes them laugh. And so anyone who are, looks for humor and likes to watch, humorous stuff, that they would be like totally open to that.
And you've invited them in a way.
Oh, have I? I'm not sure, but yeah, I guess I have.
No, but I mean, as we read your book, we get this insider view, and we're invited to laugh as well, right?
Uh-huh. Yeah, I hope so.
You spent a lot of time in the book talking about pretendians, which I never know how to spell when I'm trying to write that out, or faux Indians, these people who, and there's just
DIY Indian.
yeah. Do you have like a list of phrases for them?
I should. I
DIY, I
should.
haven't heard that before.
I'm making it up.
But on this, you write as a potential tweet for a syllabus on pretendians. Or maybe, hey, why don't you read this one? This is on page 53, the one about the Hunger Games.
53 on pretendians. Oh, the Hunger Game one?
Yeah.
In a future version of the Hunger Games, if natives are all rounded up, will Andrea Smith volunteer like Katniss as tribute to save my life?
Do you want to tell us who Andrea Smith is for people who may not know?
That's the real litmus test there. Andrea Smith, she was an academic in Indian studies, and she was really popular, and she had books that people referred to and taught, and everyone just thought she was a really remarkable genius. A Cherokee, but it turns out she's actually not Cherokee. So she was sort of, canceled, as you will. And I didn't know her. I didn't work with her. I never even read any of her books because I'm not an academic, but that's who she is. And that was, you could just say anybody's name in light of that, basically. But that would just be the litmus test. Although some people argued that they would actually tribute their own lives, because they're that dedicated to sacrificing themselves, but they're not, so it's just okay.
You seem to save a lot of your sharpest barbs for pretendians.
Yeah, I know.
Why is it that really gets under your skin so much?
Well, it gets under a lot of people's skin, but yeah, it's just a massive, complicated phenomena of native culture, and it's been going on forever too, since the beginning. Just the wanting all of the well, I'm not really composed very well on this subject. I always feel a little uncomfortable talking about pretendians. Um,
More
and I'm
comfortable
not
writing about
exactly,
it than talking about it?
oh, for sure. I'm always more comfortable writing than talking, which is another reason why I write, because everything's perfect and composed, and I can think about it over a space of days, right? Yeah. Yeah. So ask me something else
Or
about
maybe
pretending.
what's like the power of humor and sarcasm in combating this or kind of tearing this
Oh, of
down?
pretendings. Yeah, tearing down Rachel Dolezal.
Oh boy.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Do you want to kind of share how you use Rachel Dolezal kind of as this foil to kind of bounce this whole issue off of? 'Cause you have a whole
Because
chapter.
it exploded around the world and everybody saw it. I mean, if you are on social media or if you watch television, she was everywhere, and people were completely unglued by it. They were just shocked, right? It was just the biggest news story. And it just was such a it was kind of like would it was difficult to see that explode so much because people didn't quite understand that that's been happening for generations and generations and generations with Indian people, and no one bats an eyelash. Yeah, and there's no one going down in flames. I mean, there are, periodically every 6 months or seems like every year or two, there's a
But
pretendian
CNN's
going
not
down in
talking
flames.
about it, right? It's not hitting
Yeah.
the
No,
international,
nobody's making, documentaries about Ward Churchill.
oh boy.
Um, yeah, and nobody's making a documentary about Andrea Smith or, I mean, and even Elizabeth. I mean, Elizabeth was like the senator,
Yeah.
Elizabeth Warren. I mean, that was pretty big news, because President Trump can shut up about it. But and that had, very negative impact actually on Indian people, every time he would, use that, use that, I don't know what bad word thing. But yeah.
I think that was the first that a lot of Americans really thought about this. That was probably
Yeah,
for a lot of people their first exposure to this issue.
sure. Sure. It's a great, a great context though for it because everybody can, they're assuredly, they know, they have heard of that. They know of that. They've probably seen that in the news a lot. And, race shifting basically is, another name for that. I don't believe in the idea of trans race, putting that on sort of equal with like people who are trans. That does not work. That is for me not not any way equivalent.
But I
Um,
feel like I'm Irish. Like I feel like that's who I am, even though I'm not.
are you? Are you?
No, actually, I don't.
Oh,
I'm not. I just that was just the first ethnicity that came to mind. But
yeah,
yeah,
sure.
like transgender issues versus
And
trans
nobody's gonna
racial
really. I don't know
issues.
if
Yeah.
they're gonna run. Oh, right. And I don't know if anybody's going to run you out of town for feeling like that. Because I know people that are like a 16th Irish and they completely identify with, being Irish, even though they're American and, but it's just it's a terrific ethnicity. It's a terrific background,
Well, I've
the
noticed this
Irish. Oh, I
recently
did.
with there's all these DNA. Like I'm adopted, so I sent my spit into Ancestry DNA, and 'cause I
Wow.
was curious, like what am I? And it turns out I'm white, very very white. Um, but
What does
um,
that mean?
I'm
It
I'm
doesn't
some.
come back and say, wait.
I mean, it's like it's like British Isles, Scandinavia, Germany, nothing nothing exotic.
uh,
Who would have guessed by looking at me? But
Northern European.
what's been interesting is
European.
a lot of people have, their tests come back and it says, yeah, like there's some
Uh,
trace of some minority group that they hadn't assumed, or an indigenous
sure.
region. And some people
Sure.
then
Yeah.
really grab onto that. Or up in Canada, there's these ongoing issues with Métis, like Eastern Métis peoples, you know, coming out of the
Mhm.
woodwork and, uh, because they found out that,
Yeah, it's
their
really
great, great,
crazy.
great, 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 uncle or someone was Métis, and
Oh,
it's
right.
it's now a
Yeah.
core part of their identity. Which like I'm not gonna like I'm not in a position to really police or judge any of this stuff. Maybe no one's. I don't know who's in the position to police these boundaries, but it's fascinating. Or just on Facebook the other day, and I don't know what I had been typing in that made this become the ads that I started seeing on Facebook. But it was another one of these DNA test things, but as all of it had like these little cartoony icons, like find out if you're you were a pastoralist from the Asian steppe, or an indigenous mine, and it had like 5 or 6 little kind of cartoony images, but all
Yeah.
of them were kind of about discovering your, I guess what we might call like your more like indigenous roots. And
Uh,
I thought it was fascinating. Maybe it's because I type in stuff about native peoples, and so Facebook started sending me that, but that this has some value for people apparently, right?
mm. Yeah, it's the new past life regression therapy.
Yeah. Discovering that you came, that you were
And
a
in
nomadic
previous
herder
life.
in the Ural
Yeah,
Mountains.
in a previous life.
Hmm.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that that's kind of exploitive of those companies to, but they're they're jumping on that need nowadays to like not be white. I mean, there's just like, oh my gosh, I'm white. I feel, oh no, I'm horrible. And just getting all those kinds of messages, around town. We had some people putting up posters for it's okay to be white. Um, and there's just all this backlash against,
Yeah.
people. So, I mean, if you can claim that through a genetic, thing that you did have some sort of ethnic thing in your past,
But
then
who
it
does
makes it makes
everyone? That's
it
everyone.
okay.
And that's why it's so meaningless, unless you
Yeah.
were, I mean, so going back to Elizabeth Warren, like one of the more insightful comments, I think it was Kim Tallbear, who said, about claiming indigeneity and belonging. She's like, it doesn't matter what community you claim. What matters is what community claims you, right? So if I
Mhm.
found out my DNA that, oh my goodness, I'm, 1/32nd this or that, if if I wasn't raised in
Mhm.
that community and that community doesn't recognize or claim me as their own, then what does that 1/32nd mean? Like I was raised as a white kid in Northwest Washington, and DNA is not going to change that,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
I don't know.
Yeah. I think those things are ever shifting. It's just like yeah, those are like all of those sorts of things. They're just ever shifting and full of contradictions. So there's really no one way to pinpoint that down.
Yeah.
Although, I mean, yeah, for sure, that's the ongoing discourse that whoever claims you. But for even somebody like me that, I didn't grow up on the reservation, I'm not familiar with a lot of people that even live on that reservation. My mom didn't even grow up there, she was just born there. So that wouldn't even stick for me because I don't think anybody from Standing Rock even knows me, quite honestly. So I'm in Wikipedia though, so
It's
there's
official then. That's
it's official.
the Wikipedia gods have spoken.
Yeah. So I mean, in that sense, I am. I don't feel like I fit that criteria necessarily, although I'm on rolls, right? My person is on rolls. But they know my family. So I mean, I think that's, they know my family, but that's so true, and it's a diaspora, native people that, are all living in cities and so forth. That's just the nature of today. Um, yeah, but it's ever changing and ever complicated for sure. Yeah.
On page 135, um, you give us a little checklist. I think you're riffing here on Jeff Foxworthy. Like you might be a redneck. Is that the
Oh yeah,
is
yeah,
that, is that
sure.
the joke here? You might be a pretendian if.
Sure, that was the general idea.
Can you want to scan through and like read us a couple of these and then maybe you can give us some commentary on them, like why these tickle you so.
Well, the obvious one is you might be a pretendian if you write high cheekbones as proof of tribal citizenship when applying for a job. I mean, that was made famous by, Elizabeth Warren, but everybody's been saying that for like, decades, generations, high cheekbones. Oh, look at those cheekbones. Um, but that's just topical to the thing. Um, yeah, I don't know. You might be a pretendian if you carry war paint in your purse. I don't know. It's some of these, yeah.
You might be
I
a
like when
pretendian if you're in need of a dream catcher intervention.
yeah, that sort of spoofs on like the whole turquoise intervention. That was a skit that I saw once on the internet. If you have a wolf as a pet, we all know those kind of folks. Um, yeah, it's Disney Pocahontas is your role model. I have a lot of role model people in here.
Mm-hmm.
Um, well, I don't know. The tanning. You might be pretending if you've had a tanning bed membership since 1992 and buy self tanning lotion by the case. Um, some of these are just sort of adorable about if you might be pretending if you find your car at the mall's parking lot by following your trail of turquoise and abalone, which I thought was adorable.
If you cried during the movie Avatar.
Yeah. I love the Star Wars joke. You might be pretending if your star quilt was bought at Target or has Chewbacca on it, which I don't know anybody that has a star quilt with Chewbacca on it. But why that isn't a thing, I don't know why.
You need to make it a thing. That's your $1 million idea. Open an Etsy store and start selling them.
Yeah, I need to be making those.
Although I did see
Uh,
there was a Pacific Northwest native artist who was doing all
yeah.
those like Stormtrooper and
Oh,
Star Wars things, but done as kind of Pacific Northwest art iconography.
yeah. That's pretty cool stuff,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Really cool stuff. And now Star Wars is in like different Indian languages.
That's right.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. My friend said that she was walking into the Walmart in like Gallup, New Mexico, because a lot of Indians go to the Walmart
Mhm.
from far, far away because they
Yeah.
live in those really remote areas. And she was walking in the electronics department and she saw all these like Indian kids watching Star Wars and Navajo.
Oh, they had it playing in Navajo in the store.
Yeah,
Oh,
and
that's great.
I mean, she just said, "Wow, that's a cultural moment there."
Yeah.
That would be right. Wow, I love that image.
I don't know if have you watched the Mandalorian series yet?
No, I
So it's on
haven't.
Disney Plus. It's
I'm not a
it's this
big.
Star Wars thing, but it's just a straight up spaghetti western in space. I mean,
That's
speaking
it.
of kind
Okay.
of Western stereotypes and stuff, I mean, down to the music, it is. You take a famous Western movie and all of the tropes and characters and stock characters and stuff, and and storylines, and it's just that, but in space. Um,
Oh, that's awesome.
so
Yeah,
I'm sure
that's
someone's going to be doing a really great article or conference paper on kind of
maybe you should
the
write that.
indigenous politics of the Mandalorian or something. Yeah, I should write
Absolutely.
it. Yeah.
I mean, Native Americans have pretty much co-opted, that whole show with the Baby Yoda.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah,
Or
they just
well,
love
I'm
the Baby
trying to
Yoda.
remember what his name was now.
The Baby
Grogu.
Yoda.
Yeah, it was Grogu. We found out his name
Oh,
was, which seemed like a
okay.
disappointment. My kids still call him Baby Yoda. We like that better.
Oh, okay. Well, I just absolutely love though how like Native people have adopted him and taken him in,
Yeah.
even though he like committed genocide on that whole race of people by eating all of the eggs,
Oh,
like
that's
the
right.
last vestige of a race of people. He just like ate all the eggs.
Yep, he gobbled them up.
I laugh. It's so funny. Ha ha ha. No.
um,
Anyway, I don't know. Yeah.
I don't know how I got us onto Star Wars somehow. I think that's actually the second mention of Star Wars this episode. That's strange. Well, we probably need to start wrapping up a little bit. In this collection, I mean, you lampoon. You seem to be, which most comedians are. I don't know if you consider yourself a comedian, but we'll say most humorists are. I don't know. Like you're kind of an equal opportunity offender, right? Like you poke fun wherever you need to poke fun, right? Um, uh, be it you know kind of the insider teasing of Native things, or your kind of very pointed takes on patriarchy, on kind of mainstream white culture, and so forth. Um, and so, uh, maybe we could kind of wrap things up. I'm curious again as we're thinking about the West. How do you try to balance this between, you know, pushing against, perhaps oppressive white culture on the one hand, but while not doing so by romanticizing or whitewashing the foibles and the things to tease within your own Native communities? Like, so how do you kind of balance, doing both?
Well, I mean, it kind of goes back to that idea of, straddling two different worlds, which again, I don't like saying that. um, because yeah, but I prefer like the idea of just like having two different lenses. And in our multicultural world, we don't have even just two lenses anymore. We have, multitude of lenses. And I think that's what's so complicated for, a lot of the right to like, put on those galoshes, right? Because all of a sudden they can't see in black and white. They have to like view everything in all this multiplicity, and it gets very complicated in how to, act and behave and around whatever group or say what they can say and what they can't see, and it's just funny because, people of color have been doing that for as long as they've been alive, having to navigate all of this various kinds of, cultures and cultures within cultures and subcultures. And that's, yeah, so that becomes very complicated. So we're adept at that, and just fitting in and, code switching and all that kind of stuff. Although I personally I feel like I don't do a whole lot of code switching, because I spend so much time just, in one place. I don't do a lot of, especially now, but I'm rambling again.
How is humor the avenue to move forward then with all of
Oh,
this mess? Like,
uh,
what's your message for, you know,
yeah,
for white society and for Native communities? Like,
yeah. Well, Drew Hayden Taylor says that humor is the WD-40 of life, I guess. And it just disarms, and builds bridges and and, yeah, so I mean it's just that a lot, it's just that tool, by which people can live and survive and get along for the most part. I hope, I mean, in any situation people are going to like, somebody's going to laugh and break the tension. um
yeah.
and so that's why we have, jesters in our society, I guess.
Yeah.
Or just comedians within our society. They're more than entertainers. And hats off to them, right? Yeah.
Well, what do you have coming up next? What are you working on? What are your next projects that we could watch out for?
Uh, I'm supposed to have a book coming out with this really wonderful press in Spokane, um, and Scablands Books. And that's sort of a book of humorous, I don't know, poetry, I guess. Um, because I say I guess because a lot of the pieces sort of, you know, like myself, straddles different genres, straddling different worlds. Um, and,
You keep saying you don't
so
like that imagery, but you keep using it.
I know it's terrible. And I have just different projects that I'm working on, that I'm just like, yeah. So I have another, like a nonfiction, another, humor book, another nonfiction book. I have a young adult book, and I have a book of poetry, and then I have a collection of fiction. So yeah, different little projects
Well, we'll
on the
point
back
people to your
burner.
website so they can
Yeah,
watch there for
yeah.
updates.
So they might look for updates that will never come.
Do you not
I
update
never
your
have
website as often as I don't update my website?
forget, I open these things, I forget the passwords.
Yeah, I have the same
Yeah.
problem. Well, thanks for spending some time with us, and thanks for this book. It was really great. It was so much fun to read, and especially when so much of what I read is like heavy and dense, and you have to slog through stuff. This was a lot of fun.
Great. Well, I'm really glad that you liked it, and thank you so much for supporting it and supporting me and having me on your show.
Yep, my pleasure. Well, take care, Tiffany.
Yeah. You take care. Bye.
Well, that's it for this month. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you'll subscribe. Please leave us a review on whatever app or platform you're listening through, or follow us on Facebook at Writing Westward Podcast or Twitter at Writing West, where you can get updates, leave comments, and communicate with me. Writing Westward is a production of the Charles Rudd Center for Western Studies at Brigham Young University. We are an interdisciplinary research center that supports academic research and the promotion of public understanding of the North American West. We host regular public lectures, which we live stream. We have an annual funding cycle with awards, grants, fellowships in categories that nearly anyone researching and working on the region from nearly any disciplinary approach or towards nearly any kind of final product can apply. Learn more at reddcenter.byu.edu. That's REDD center.byu.edu. Our theme music was provided by local Utah composer Micah Dahl Anderson. Find him at Micah, D-A-H-L, Anderson, that's Anderson with an O.com. I'll put a link in the episode description. My name is Brendan Rensink. I serve as the podcast host, producer, sound engineer, publicist, just about everything else, so you can direct praise or critique my way. I'm the author and editor of a number of books and other studies on the West, borderlands, Native peoples, genocide studies, religion, and the environment. To contact me about the podcast, my own research, or just about anything else, head to bwrensink.org. That's BWRENSINK.org. Or follow me on Twitter at Brendan W. Rensink. Until next month, be well, be curious, and be kind.